Human rights, as the name suggests, feels pretty fundamental. These are significant individual rights which go to the core of what it means to be human. So, when the government announced plans to scrap the Human Rights Act and replace it with a new so-called British Bill of Rights, people got a little concerned. Now, this is something that government has been talking about for a while, but we got our first taste of a detailed policy proposal when the government published a 123-page document with the title Human Rights Act Reform: A Modern Bill of Rights. So, in this video, we're going to be having a look at the proposal and what it means for your most fundamental rights. If you like our content, then be sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss an upload from us. So, we're going to split this video into 3 parts. First, we're going to explain what the Human Rights Act actually is and how it works. Second, we're going to have a look at the 3 criticisms levied against it. And third, we're going to be having a look at how the government's new proposed bill would change things. So, what's the Human Rights Act? Well, the origins of the Human Rights Act lies with the European Convention on Human Rights, or ECHR. The ECHR was first drafted up in the 1950s, drawing on the principles outlined in the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was drawn up in the aftermath of the Second World War. Importantly, the ECHR is completely separate from the European Union. The ECHR was drafted by the Council of Europe, not the European Union. There were originally just 12 rights, Articles 2 through 13, but the list has expanded significantly with additional protocols. As a founding member of the Council of Europe, the UK has always been a signatory to the ECHR, which means that, if UK citizens felt that their rights had been breached, they could take the issue to the ECHR court in Strasbourg and argue their case. The Human Rights Act essentially took the ECHR and copied and pasted it into domestic law. This was for 2 reasons. First, having to take cases to Strasbourg Court was expensive and impractical, which is why, before the Human Rights Act, the ECHR was rarely applied in the UK. And second, there was popular demand for a UK Bill of Rights, because, well, most other European countries have their own national Bill of Rights, and who doesn't want to have their rights protected? This is why, beginning in the 70s, politicians started talking about it. Margaret Thatcher included a possible Bill of Rights in her 1979 manifesto, but never followed through on it, and Neil Kinnock promised a complementary and democratically enforced Bill of Rights in his 1992 manifesto, but then lost the election. Tony Blair finally passed the Human Rights Act, or HRA, in 1998, which essentially meant that the ECHR could be applied directly in the UK. So that's the HRA. It's basically the European Convention of Human Rights written up in domestic UK law. This sounds like it should be pretty uncontroversial, but politicians have been complaining about it for years now, and Dominic Raab is especially hostile to it. He wrote a book called The Assault of Liberty: What Went Wrong with Rights, and once said that he doesn't believe in economic or social rights. When he was appointed Justice Secretary in September of last year, it became clear that reform was coming. So, what precisely don't politicians like Raab like about the HRA? Well, according to the government's recent proposal, they've got 3 specific concerns about the HRA. The constitutional concerns are that 1. The HRA gives too much weight to European law over UK laws, and 2. The HRA gives the judiciary too much power in the UK's constitutional arrangement. The third concern is that the HRA has led to, quote, rights inflation, and now violates our common sense moral institutions. Let's start with the constitutional concerns. The first concern is that the HRA gives too much weight to European law over UK law. Essentially, Section 2 of the HRA says that UK courts have to, quote, take account of any court judgments made in the ECHR court in Strasbourg. Some politicians don't like this because they feel that UK law shouldn't be limited by foreign law made in the ECHR, or at least not to the extent that it currently is. The second concern is that the HRA gives too much power to the judiciary in the UK's constitutional arrangement. This is because the HRA isn't your average piece of legislation. Usually, if Parliament passes a new law that contradicts an old law, judges just ignore the old law. This practice is known as implicit repeal, but things are different with the HRA. Judges are obliged to interpret new laws so as to make them compatible with the HRA, and if a new law isn't compatible with the Human Rights Act, then a judge can issue a declaration of incompatibility, which basically says that this new law violates human rights. While declarations of incompatibility aren't binding, they carry political weight. After all, it's not a great look for government to be seen to be violating human rights, which is why the government usually repeals any incompatible legislation. For example, when a judge declared the detention without charge of a group of foreign nationals under the Terrorism Act 2000 incompatible with the HRA, the government repealed the relevant provisions with the Prevention of Terrorism Act 2005. Some people don't like this because they feel it gives the judiciary too much power and unduly limits the democratically elected parliament. The third concern is that the HRA has essentially led to rights inflation and now involves too many rights. In the government's own proposal, they argue that the HRA's right inflation has lost touch with common sense. Now, this might sound a bit dodgy. After all, most rights are usually a good thing, but to be fair to the government, A, the list of rights has got expanded with various protocols and interpretations, and B, there have been some controversial rulings. For example, in 2012, the ECHR ruled that the deportation of radical Islamist cleric Abu Qatada violated Article 6, the right to a fair trial, because some of the evidence used against him might have been obtained via torture. In 2005, the ECHR also ruled that the UK government's blanket ban on prisoners voting violated Article 3 of Protocol 1, the right to free elections. We should be clear, we're not taking a side on either of these cases. They're just renowned as some of the most controversial, and they're both mentioned in the government's proposal. So, those are the three concerns. What does the government want to do about them? Well, the proposal is a bit vague. After all, it's just a proposal, not an actual white paper. But the long and short of it is that the government wants to get rid of the Human Rights Act and replace it with the British Bill of Rights. Now, this doesn't mean that the UK is leaving the ECHR, just that it's interpreting it differently. So, how would this British Bill of Rights deal with each of the government's three concerns? Well, when it comes to the constitutional concern, the new Bill of Rights would cut out Section 3 of the HRA, which says that UK courts have to, quote, take account of Strasbourg rulings, and just rely on the convention that says usually UK courts don't contradict international ones, or replace it with something more restrictive. When it comes to the balance between Parliament and the courts and the whole declaration of incompatibility thing, there aren't any concrete plans, but the proposal does note things might need to be loosened to allow for more, quote, innovative policies. To address the apparent inflation of rights, the new British Bill of Rights would try to avoid interpreting rights such that they would create a positive obligation. A positive obligation is basically when a right implies that the state has to do something for you, rather than just not interfere with your liberty. For example, the right to life could either be interpreted as saying that the state can't intervene in your life and kill you, or as saying that the state has a positive obligation to keep you alive, maybe with public health care or some sort of security system. The new British Bill of Rights would try to avoid interpretations of the latter sort. The new bill would also place particular focus on certain rights that are deemed especially important to British legal tradition, including the right to trial by jury and freedom of expression, and make it more difficult for claimants to make human rights claims by requiring that they demonstrate that they've suffered, quote, significant disadvantage in an attempt to limit spurious claims. There's also a specific bit about deportations, where the government suggests reinterpreting or limiting Articles 5, 6 and 8, which are often used in deportation cases, so that they can't be. So, is this new British Bill of Rights a good idea? Well, it's hard to say. It's not fully formed yet, and none of us are lawyers. Nonetheless, two things are worth noting. First, a recent independent judicial review concluded that while they agreed that UK law should be given precedence over international law, a wholesale revision of the HRA was unnecessary. Second, while some other countries have updated their human rights legislation over the years, they usually just build on previous legislation, and so don't require repealing previous legislation. For example, the HRA was passed on top of the 1689 Bill of Rights and Magna Carta, both of which remain on the statute book. the UK would be an outlier and the first democracy in the world to repeal human rights legislation in order to introduce new legislation. Anyway, what do you think? Is there such a thing as too many rights? And if so, is the government striking the right balance here? As always, let us know your thoughts down below. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible, and if you want to see your name at the end of videos just like these people, then you too can sign up by clicking the link below.